important. This time is actually a great time for us to celebrate as well, celebrate interfaith cooperation. Some of us have just finished celebrating Easter, others of us Passover, some of us are celebrating the New Year, and I think all of us, I hope, are celebrating the fact that it's finally spring. Yay! So I thought I would just tell you a little bit about my faith, engaged Buddhism, how I came to this practice, and how this practice is inherently interfaith and goes together with the scholarly and advocacy work that I do. My journey to interfaith work started with basketball. I was 9, and I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in a small suburb of Los Angeles that is predominantly Japanese and Chinese American. And although my family is Catholic and we observe Catholic traditions and holidays, Buddhism was always around me, even if I didn't completely understand what it meant. When I joined this basketball team, my best friend in middle school was Japanese American, and they needed someone tall. They needed a center, and at that time, that was me. Not so much anymore. As I got to know my teammates and they became my best friends and their families became my family, I was really, really drawn to Japanese culture. And I actually decided to attend a boarding school in New Hampshire so that I could spend a year studying in Japan, studying as a Japanese student. I lived in the center of Tokyo, and the school that I attended was on the outskirts of the city, so every day I had to take a train, and I had to pass through Shinjuku Station. Now, anyone that's ever been to Japan, Tokyo specifically, knows that Shinjuku is like Times Square. There's lights and noise and traffic and smells and people everywhere, and it's so easy to get caught up in that chaos. It's exciting. One day I was coming home from school, basketball practice had ended a little bit early, and I decided to stop at Shinjuku and explore the neighborhood. I hadn't really explored there at all, and it was a hobby of mine to stop at a new neighborhood when I had time. Upon exiting the train station, you can imagine what hit me. There were neon lights and advertisements and people bumping into me and smells of food and other things and traffic. As I walked down the street away from the train station, though, something was different. I stepped onto the grounds of a Buddhist temple, just feet away from the entrance to the train station, and something transformed. It was like I was in a new realm. All of a sudden, there was quiet. There was calm. There was respect and reverence for this space. This was a sacred space. I knew immediately that I wanted to follow this sacredness. I wanted to figure out what it was, and I wanted to figure out what it meant to me. So I decided to attend the University of Southern California and study religion and Japanese and business, because why not? And as I started studying religion, I took classes in Hinduism and Buddhism and Islam and Judaism and Christianity and so many other wonderful traditions and topics in religion. But something was missing from my study and my journey. Finally, I met with Dean of Religious Life, Varun Soni. Varun Soni had just started when I met with him. And he was the first unordained Hindu in this kind of position anywhere in the United States. And he was so cool. He had gone to divinity school at Harvard. He had a radio show. He had spent a semester studying as a Buddhist monk in Nepal and India. He owned a graphic novel company. I wanted to be like him. He said, "Jem, you need to join the Interfaith Council." I had no idea what that was. What does interfaith mean? But I went to the first meeting and I immediately knew that this was my home. These were my people. Even though the students came from different fields and disciplines and faith traditions and nationalities and ethnicities and economic backgrounds, we were all asking the same deep questions. Questions about meaning, about what it means to be a human, about life, and about death. And about 2 months into my joining the Interfaith Council and being so immersed in this wonderful new community, an event happened on campus that made me realize how essential interfaith work is. It was Thanksgiving, and I was at home, my family's house in Los Angeles, and the usual suspects were in their usual places. My extended family was around the TV. My mother was clearing away dishes, and my father was haphazardly throwing them in the dishwasher so he could get back to the TV to watch whatever sporting event was on. And all of a sudden, someone flipped the channel. CNN came on, and there was a scroll across the TV that said, "Terrorist attacks in Mumbai." This was 2008. Now, the University of Southern California boasts that it is home to the largest Southeast Asian population of any university or college in the United States. And this is wonderful, but I knew at that moment, recalling that statistic, that this event in Mumbai was going to affect our community greatly. On the Monday, after we returned from Thanksgiving break, the Office of Religious Life held a vigil in University Church to honor the victims and the families and those who were affected by this great tragedy. The vigil was beautiful. There were candles everywhere. Varun offered wonderful, peaceful words of encouragement in a time of despair. Our Associate Dean of Religious Life read some very meaningful passages from different sacred texts. We had some words from different Interfaith Council members. At the end of the vigil, we were all to pick up a candle and go outside to place in the fountain nearby, to symbolize a little bit of light in a time of great darkness. But before I left, before I picked up my candle and exited, some students rushed to the front of the stage. They were visibly upset, and I saw Dean Soni take them back, try to calm them down, listen to them, but he wouldn't let them speak. At first I wondered why he didn't let them speak. They were clearly upset, and they needed to express this emotional tragedy that had just occurred. I learned later that these students wanted to express words of hate to Muslims, to Pakistani students, to the same students that were sitting around them in this chapel, this church. At that moment, I realized two things. I realized that interfaith engagement is essential for all of us to learn how to do. And two, that diversity is a wonderful thing. But if we don't attend to it, if we don't give everyone a chance to name their unique experience and their fundamental beliefs, we're opening the floodgates for hate and misunderstanding. The work that I do now in the Spiritual Life Office at the University of Chicago 8 years later is training young interfaith leaders to go out into the world and to change conversations. I've been reading a lot about behavioral psychology, and I've realized something about interfaith engagement. Interfaith engagement is more than just surface-level religious literacy. It's really nice to come together and talk about the different foods that we eat on holidays and our traditions, and different rituals and practices that we do, and different milestones in our lives. We need that. But interfaith engagement is transformative. It's actually an essential piece of the education that we get at institutions of higher education, colleges and universities. Why? Reading about behavioral psychology, I've realized that in some ways, our minds are predisposed to dehumanize those who we see as the other. Those who we see as not our family and our friends, or most importantly, those who hold different worldviews. We tend to not see them as complex human beings that are relevant and legitimate and important to the conversation. There's an example of Republicans and Democrats in a room together. If a Republican senator is speaking to a room of Republicans, it's more likely that even if the audience disagrees with certain points of the talk, they'll see this person as legitimate and relevant and a human being, someone to listen to, because they perceive that this person has a similar worldview. The same token, if this is a Democrat, and it goes both ways, not judging either one, the audience, even if the speaker is trying to find common ground, will not see this person as a complex human being, and rather only see this person as one piece of their identity, their political identity. Dehumanization is so rampant in our world today. With social media, it's so easy for us to choose who we listen to, who our friends are, where we get our news from. It's so easy for us to click block, unlike, unfriend. It's so easy for us to hide tweets and Instagrams and whatever source of media that is your preference. However, interfaith engagement offers a sign of relief. Given the behavioral psychology studies, we've seen that by getting people together in a room, naming our personal experiences that lead to our own unique worldviews, we can reverse this process of dehumanization. And further, we can understand ourselves better. We can understand everyone in the room as a human being that has so many different life experiences and thus a unique worldview, something to be celebrated, something that contributes to the learning we seek by coming to these institutions. I've learned through studying behavioral psychology and working on different scholarly studies of interfaith engagement across college campuses that my own faith is actually inherently interfaith. The story of the Buddha, a young Nepalese prince living in complete comfort, is one of spiritual awakening by engaging with difference. The Buddha lived comfortably and didn't experience much suffering, so he thought, until he happened upon a sick man one day. And this struck the Buddha. Why was this person's experience so different than his own? He began to ask questions about what it meant to be a human being and what it meant to be himself. And again, later, he experienced a dying man, an aging man, close to the point of death. And he again questioned, why is this person's experience different than my own? Finally, the young Buddha caught sight of a man who had died. And he wondered what it meant to be a finite human being. His spiritual journey was awakened, and he lived with these questions for the rest of his life. Our job as interfaith leaders, I have learned in my 8 years of interfaith work, is to be inspired by stories of interfaith collaboration that we see every single day, by stories of mutual respect and embrace, by stories of engaging across differences to better understand ourselves, to enrich our community. I'll end with a story of two of my students. This story seems really simple. It seems like it would be a norm on our campuses, and hopefully it is. The Spiritual Life Council at the University of Chicago was to embark on a day-long retreat. We were going to Starved Rock National Park. We had to leave very, very early on a Saturday morning in October. And most of us know that getting up early on a Saturday morning is not the ideal situation for college students. It was dark when I arrived at Rockefeller Chapel, our meeting place. As I rushed to get everything ready, I put coffee and donuts out. I looked outside, down the street, and down the path to make sure that people weren't getting lost. I saw two figures coming up the path. And as I waited and they got closer, I realized it was two of my students. Rachel, a Jewish student, and Rafia, a Muslim student. Rachel and Rafia had exchanged phone numbers so that they could call each other that morning to make sure that neither of them slept through their alarm, something that both of them were rather prone to do. I thought to myself, this seems like a normal interaction. This might happen every day here. But in other parts of the world, not only would these students not call each other, they wouldn't even get the chance to know each other. And they might hate each other without ever getting a chance to experience one another and the richness that they bring to conversations. I hope that as interfaith leaders in the 21st century, we can be inspired every day. We can hear stories of interfaith cooperation. We can lift them up, and we can be the light in a time of otherwise great darkness. Thank you.